This week, part 1 of my talk with longtime DC writer Dan Mishkin. In this installment, we talk about the 1980s series Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, co-written with Gary Cohn and drawn by Ernie Colon. Who was the intended audience for the book? Why was the original maxi series followed by an attempt at an ongoing series? And why did the ongoing end so soon? Would he do anything differently if he could work on Amethyst now? Also, Dan talks about the meaning of the superhero concept and how it speaks to kids, and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Recently, I had quite a lengthy talk with comics writer Dan Mishkin, who I met at the Bowling Green State University Conference on Batman in Popular Culture last April. This week, part 1 of my talk with him, in which we focus primarily on the 1980s DC series Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld. Here's part 1 of the interview. Okay, I'm talking with Dan Mishkin, who is in Michigan. How are you?
I'm fine. People sometimes get mixed up with Michigan and Michigan, but
well, yeah, it occurred to me. Yeah, your last name and your state sound quite similar.
That's right. My wife thought we met in college. She thought when she first heard me called on in a class that was just like some hippie name that I had like Indiana Jones, who was not a hippie exactly, but you know what I mean. Like Barbara Seagull or something like that. That's probably before your time. But yeah, she thought that I was calling myself Michigan as some sort of weird hip thing to do, but it's actually my name, Mishkin. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So we met at the Batman conference at Bowling Green State University in April, right. And I guess you had been a student there in the past, right?
I was in graduate school there, although I didn't get a graduate degree. I've got all sorts of partial degrees, in my history. But Gary Cohn, who was my writer co-creator on both Amethyst and Blue Devil, did get a master's degree at Bowling Green. He went there. He was doing interesting stuff, so I went there. He had followed me to Michigan State, where we both got our undergraduate degrees. We've spent most of our lives having people think that we just met each other. But in fact, we've known each other since we were about 12. And we just sort of followed each other to different places. So.
Yes, interesting. Okay. So, yeah, I wanted to ask, since you wrote quite a few comics with him, how did that kind of partnership work? How do two people write one thing?
Well, so from the plotting point of view, it's funny. The plotting point of view to me is simpler, but it probably to some people sounds more complicated. Gary and I, as I say, have known each other since we were 12 years old. And if we start talking about stories, it's as if we share a brain. So, so we're like cutting each other off or really completing each other's sentences and stuff like that. And so we would go, oh, yeah, oh, right, okay, good. And so as far as plotting was concerned, it was just a kind of, bull session, kind of never stopping, making sure that somebody's either going to remember it or is writing it down. So when we were plotting stories, that is how it happened. And then one of us would take on the responsibility of carrying the story forward into a script or a plot, so that on the early stories we did, like in House of Mystery, that sort of thing, the 3 and 5 and 7 page stories, we would come up with the idea. Sometimes it was more one of us than the other. But in any case, then one of us would write the script, and the other one would check it over and make changes or whatever, almost kind of edit. Rarely, I think, was there a time when we said, "Oh no, this is not what we were talking about." When it came to writing, doing plots and writing dialogue, we kind of did the plots together, banged them out together, at least in very rough form. Then one of us would take it forward. So if you talk about the two books, characters that we are best known for, Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, and Blue Devil, I was kind of the lead on Amethyst, and Gary was definitely the lead on Blue Devil, although we plotted it all together. So,
okay. Well, it sounds like something that you wouldn't be able to do with just any other writer. It has to be somebody that you're really...
Right. It has to be somebody, I think, that you're really just totally simpatico with. I mean, I did a DC Comics Presents with Bob Rozakis, and that worked out fine. That was, something we did on the phone. But, without diminishing what those stories were, it's just each one is a one-shot Superman team-up, and it's not hard to put the building blocks in place. Especially working with Julie Schwartz as the editor, and Julie was very much about the building blocks of story have to be in place. So, so if you know that that's what's expected of you, it's not hard to work with another writer. But yeah, I couldn't just walk up with somebody and say, hey, let's do this together, Although I should say that I collaborate with artists sometimes in the same way. That I think people don't really understand what writer-artist collaboration is. And sometimes it's not much of anything. Sometimes it's a writer who's writing a script and hopefully understands visual storytelling enough that any artist can make it work. And sometimes they'll lay out something special and new. But sometimes it's a matter of you are going back and forth and bouncing ideas, and you're seeing something in the art, and especially when you're writing a plot followed by pencils, followed by dialogue. So that my friend Ernie Colon, the co-creator of Amethyst, just died a few days ago.
Oh.
And Ernie put obscene dialogue on the boards for the villains in Amethyst, and that was just what he was feeling, and I couldn't use the dialogue, but it really revealed more about their characters. Maybe it's something that was in the plot that Gary and I had written somewhere down there, but we might never have dug it out. But Ernie saw it, felt it, and did it, and said, oh, okay, so now I have a better handle on how, not so much Dark Opal, the main villain, but Sardonyx, his main henchman, and Carnelian, his magically powerless adopted son. I got a lot of the sense of who they were because Ernie wrote this unprintable dialogue. And then there's times when an artist just shows you something you weren't expecting. I did a miniseries with Tom Mandrake called Creeps, and there was one scene that, he drew the scene that was in my plot. There's no question about it. But when I looked at the pencils, I was like, whoa, this is really taking it to the limit. And I called him up, I said, did you mean for this to be, quite so out there? And he said, well, I drew it that way. So yeah.
So out there, what do you mean out there exactly?
Oh, it was a horror scene that was a sort of mucky, globby, but humanoid creature ended up falling in the path of one of those big floor polishing buffer machines. And Tom drew spatter all over the page. And so that's what seemed pretty out there to me. But like he said, he drew it that way. And talking about creeps is not a very well-known piece of my work, but creeps, I have to admit to coming up with titles sometimes before I come up with stories. It's a little embarrassing, but creeps just struck me as a good title. I was listening to Lyle Lovett's song as this refrain, look around and you will see the world is full of creeps like me. You look surprised. You shouldn't be. The world is full of creeps like me. So I was thinking about that song and I said, oh, super powered, but, weird and grotesque could be kind of interesting. Not like the X-Men are weird, but I mean, weird. Mm-hmm. So I was at Todd's house and I mentioned this to him, just like this. And a couple of weeks later, he sent me this art. There was like a dozen characters that he had created based on the idea of creeps, and then we couldn't not do it, so that ended up being published by Image. But, it was really Tom's responding to this little germ that I had and then going somewhere with it. And then I had to think, so what is the story of these characters? So there's a lot of that back and forth and that collaboration, and it's good when you're working with an artist that you can trust to do that. Tom is probably the person, when we work together, for whom I write the sparest plots, the sparest descriptions of what's going on, because I just want to let him go. Mm-hmm. And he knows where he's going. I also recall a time when Keith Giffen did an issue of Blue Devil, and he called me on the phone, and he said, and the page numbers, I don't know what they really are, but he said something like, if I start the fight where you want on page 8 and I end it where you want on page 16, can I pretty much do it however I want? And I said, sure. And he did. I mean, he did his thing, and there was a rubber chicken in it. I would not have a rubber chicken in it. But, Keith made it work, and it was just really funny and fun. So trusting artists is something that writers don't always do, but it's hugely important until you're proven wrong, and then you have to read it.
Now, you mentioned in your talk at Bowling Green that your first story was drawn by Steve Ditko.
First story was drawn by Steve Ditko by sheer happenstance.
What story was that?
It was the story was called. Now I can't remember which was the original. It was either called originally On the Night of His Return and changed to On the Day of His Return, or the other. There's a reason why for the change. This was actually very funny. Not the story. The story wasn't funny. The learning that I got from selling this story, that Gary and I got from selling this story. Jack C. Harris, who was an editor at DC at the time, was willing to look at our stuff. He sent us his kind of, not story Bible, but this is the kind of story that I want for this new series that I'm doing called Time Warp, which is basically House of Mystery stuff done as science fiction. Clearly where he was going was twist endings, and even more clearly, the twist endings were the monster eating the pretty girl astronaut, right? That's the kind of thing that he seemed to be going for. So we had a story where the weird old man on this barren, snowy planetoid that this astronaut crash lands on turns out to be Santa Claus and takes him back to Earth on his sleigh. And he like totally violated what Jack was asking for. But of 12 springboards, that was the one that he asked us to do. So that, like I say, that was a real learning experience. You know, people don't know what they want. Editors don't always know what they want. I know that readers don't know what they want. It is, so this is going to sound vain, but I just think it's true. Readers don't know what they want until I tell them what they want or show them what they want. And it's true not just about me, but about, you know, look, did somebody want Watchmen? Did somebody want The Dark Knight Returns? Nobody would have said, this is what we're looking for. You know, DC Comics wouldn't have said this is what we're looking for. They just gave Frank and Alan their lead to do it because they'd already proven to be successful quantities, right? People don't know. Amethyst was a kind of success. It was, I don't know why DC would publish a comic for 12 and 13-year-old girls in 1983, but probably Jeanette had something to do with it, and Paul and Dick too. But you know, and in both the case of Blue Devil and Amethyst, those were solicited as continuing like 8-page features in Tales of the Unexpected or something like that, and DC said, no, let's see if we can turn this into a book. So even though Gary and I did not have the track record of an Alan Moore or a Frank Miller, DC was open to, let's just see, let's just try it. So in selling this story to Jack Harris, our very first story, it was we're going to try this thing, and that turned out, the thing he wasn't looking for turned out to be the thing that he liked. And then he assigned it to Steve Ditko to draw, which is like every little boy's dream. You know?
Yeah, I'm looking at a comic book database. It listed as on the day of his return. In Time Warp number 3. I think I called it on the night of his return in the script, and I think Jack felt that was that tipped the Santa Claus element too much. You know, so that's my recollection, my guess, whatever. You know. Okay. By the way, I remember this is 40 years ago. I yeah, 1979.
So embarrassed to say this. I'm shocked to say it, but it's 40 years ago. So it's not like I'm going to remember everything, you know.
Right.
But you know, sometimes the stories that you tell are better than the true stuff. I was having lunch with Danny Fingeroth one time. You know, Danny is a writer and was editor of Spider-Man, and you know, has written about comics in a sort of scholarly way, and has a biography of Stan Lee coming out in the fall, which I'm really looking forward to. And I asked Danny at lunch we were having one time, I said, so you think when Stan tells these stories about what went on, he knows anymore if they're true? And, you know, Danny was, I think, kind of skeptical, because what happens is, you know, you tell a memory and it becomes the story, right? And sometimes it's a good story and you want to keep it that way. And the fact that there were variations or it wasn't quite like that, just kind of, you know, it's like when the legend becomes the truth, print the legend. That's, you know, that was the quick way of saying it at the end of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, right? So yeah. So what were we talking
about? Well, let's talk about Amethyst. Okay. So I didn't read quite as much as I wanted to. I got the first 9 issues read of the 83 series.
Okay.
Now, where did this idea come from?
Oh, so you know, it kind of comes initially from being asked to do an 8-page ongoing series in the unexpected, right? That's you're
something
soliciting.
aimed at girls.
No, that wasn't the request.
Okay,
The request was come up with a series idea.
just a series, anything. Okay,
Yeah, and Gary and I played around with the idea of, honestly, there is at the core a not very original idea in Amethyst, right? There is the changeling idea, right? Not the changeling from, as much as I love Deep Space Nine, Odo is not a changeling, he's a shapeshifter. A changeling is a child that is left in the place of a human child, right? In folklore. That's what a changeling is. Okay. So we had this idea of doing a story about a changeling, somebody who came from a magical world, was switched with a human infant, and let's see what we can do with that. And so we were working on this idea that we were tentatively calling the changeling. And honestly, I don't remember really any details of what the changeling, if the details differed from what we ended up with Amethyst story-wise, I don't remember what they were. Because one day I was standing in my kitchen and the word amethyst popped into my head. And we'd been thinking, maybe we need a name besides the changeling. What would be a good name? We didn't have anything. And then, obviously, there's parts of your brains that are hard at work when you're not aware of it, right? And that part of my brain pushed that word into my consciousness. And I said, oh, yeah, that's a word. That's a name. That's I think I thought of the Gemworld then, called Gary. He liked it. And so everything that was the changeling became Amethyst, it was Amethyst to us, then it was Amethyst, Princess of the Gemworld, and then DC insisted on taking off the, so we're stuck. I guess it's sort of like the Ukraine and the Congo. They the Gemworld is now just Gemworld. But to me, I always think of it as the Gemworld. Partly because that's not its name. It is, as we reveal later on, it's a world that was discovered by magical people from Earth, right? And so then they had their gems and their power. So they sort of referred to it as the Gemworld to distinguish it from the place they came from, but it wasn't like it was natively so anyhow, to me, it's the Gemworld. So if there were pieces of the changeling story that that didn't make it into Amethyst, I don't remember what they were. Because obviously Amethyst calls to mind the gender and the age of the character really, immediately, right? I mean, 13-year-old girl makes a huge amount of sense once you have the word amethyst. And of course, if the story, which the changeling story might have been, I don't remember, but if the story is about discovering that this is what you are, then discovering that on your 13th birthday is, it makes sense, sort of from the point of view of the master story that we all kind of live by, right? So there you are, coming into your own. You're beginning to see how you will separate and individuate, right? And you discover that what you thought about yourself is completely, well, not completely not true, because her loving parents were her loving parents, right? Which is important. But everything you thought about your normalness is gone. And of course, the first issue begins with a discussion or just a little thing about how we'd like to believe that there's something different about us. That there's, people imagine that they're adopted and that their parents were something special, and whatever. And in the musical Annie, Annie sings this wonderful song, someone is calling me baby, maybe, and she's imagining these parents that she never knew, right? And so you imagine, in her case, she is an orphan, but even those of us who are not, will sometimes say, I feel different from my parents, and maybe I come from someplace else. So again, being 13 years old, that's a great place to suddenly make that real in a kid's life. And then she has to become Amethyst. And she, and again, this is probably not until we were doing Amethyst rather than the Changeling that she physically becomes an adult, a young adult, rather than a 13-year-old, which was really only because, maybe not only, the germ of it was that I loved The Fly. I don't know if you ever read The Fly, a Jack Kirby character from...
okay.
Right? One of the Archie superhero characters, I think, or maybe it was from I can't remember what the company name was, but anyhow, The Fly was little Tommy Troy, and when he rubs his ring, so it's a Billy Batson thing, but I didn't know Billy Batson when I was reading The Fly.
Okay,
it's really great how we all have our this is the first time this was ever done thing in comics or popular culture, and really it's a trope that goes back forever. So that for me, watching in Star Wars when Darth Vader says to Luke, "I am your father," to me that's okay. He's just doing the old "I am your father" thing, but he's not really his father, because I had seen it too many times. So for me, The Fly and Little Tommy Troy was the first kid who becomes an adult. So I need to digress about superheroes.
Okay.
Not that I haven't been digressing already.
Digress from your digression.
Yes. But I have a very specific idea of why superheroes exist. I mean, why superhero stories exist. And why I think that, for the most part, they are not meant for adults. And it is this. The superhero story is the story that says to you, one day I will have my own power in the world, and I have to figure out how I'm going to use it. And that's like a hugely important thing for kids. That's, I'm really always, if given the chance, going to write for tweens. I'm going to write for 10, 11, 12-year-olds because of that story. Because you are in this place where you now see that you are separate from your parents. You see that they're adults and you're going to be one of them. And you understand that there's got to be a moral compass in there somewhere. And especially the DC characters. I get why Marvel took over, okay? But I am at heart a DC fan. And one of the significant reasons is that a lot of those characters, especially Flash's rogues gallery, okay, they are they are deciding day by day if they're going to be good guys or bad guys. You know, they really, I mean, it was like what Gary and I used the trickster in Blue Devil was because he is like the epitome of the guy who could pretty easily have gone the other way. You know, there's a difference between a villain and a bad guy. And so Marvel had more villains, it seems to me. And DC was rife with bad guys. And I like the idea of bad guys because you can see either how they went wrong or how they might go a different way. And that's all part of that story, is that it's really a choice. And that's why those characters are so appealing and interesting to me.
Coming up, Dan talks Amethyst. First, thanks to all our patrons at patreon.com/deconcomics, more classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics have been unlocked, and I'm releasing them at the rate of one per week in reverse order. This week, I'll be republishing episode 91 from September 3rd, 2007, in which Brandon and I discuss Persepolis, Ghost World, and Fear Agent. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
So when you were writing Amethyst, I guess it sounds like maybe consciously or subconsciously you were maybe aiming at that age group. But so was it kind of an accident that it seemed, at least comes across somewhat as a comic for girls?
Yeah, I never saw it as a comic for girls. I saw it as a comic for tweens. Mm-hmm. Clearly, given the outward appearances, it's going to be more appealing to girls, I think. Mm-hmm. But DC wasn't pitching it that way. I have met plenty of men, right? Like 40-year-old men mm-hmm. who were big Amethyst fans. And now this is, to some extent, a self-selecting crowd, because these are people who still go to comic book conventions, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm at a comic book convention, I'm as likely to be told by a man as a woman that they were Amethyst fans, I think. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, because I don't get this for Amethyst, but for Wonder Woman, because I wrote Wonder Woman for 3 years, and I think I did a good job right before Crisis on Infinite Earths. I get a fair number of gay men who tell me that they liked my Wonder Woman. Mm. So, I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't hear that with Amethyst. I think that another digression, my very first comic book was an issue of Sugar and Spike. You know Sugar and Spike?
I had one of those when I was a kid, yeah.
Sheldon Mayer, toddlers who speak to each other in a language that they understand but that the grown-ups don't. Mm-hmm. And my older brother came home with an issue of Sugar and Spike, the very first comic book I ever saw. And I opened it up, and my world changed. I mean, not everybody has this reaction to comic books. I understand that. But it's like opening the door when the house lands in Oz and going from sepia to color.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like that was the experience of opening a comic book for the first time. And Amethyst, I think, although it's not gaudy, right? It's got that kind of eye-popping brilliance. You know, Ernie was I mean, he was a fantastic artist.
Mm-hmm.
He was, you know, it was so alive. You know, people since Ernie's death the other day, a couple of people have said, so all those faces in Amethyst, like Dark Opal has this clasp that always mirrors his expression, and the trees have faces, and the walls have faces that appear to be moving, and stuff like that. Was that you? No, that wasn't Gary and me. That was Ernie.
Mm-hmm.
That was and Gary reminded me the other day that Ernie said on the Gemworld everything is alive, and so I think that part of the appeal of Amethyst and why there are both men and women coming to me telling me how much they love it is not just Ernie and his great artwork, but the fact that it draws you in as a living world that you're taking part in, and that's, you know, that can be and may have been for some people as life-changing as that Sugar and Spike issue was for me.
Mm-hmm. What was I going to say?
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I'll just keep talking.
I still got stuff. I'm trying to get in mind what my actual question was. Let's see.
Right.
So, yeah, Amethyst. Oh, I was going to say, on at least superficially, people might take it as a comic for girls because it's got all the jewels in it and stuff. But on the other hand, I was surprised at how much death there is in it. Lots of people die.
Yeah, there's we don't stint on that, you know. It's but you know, that's partly just an example of the fact that we weren't writing it for either boys or girls.
Mm-hmm.
We were writing it for an audience that we thought would be attracted and could take it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's people. Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, when Granch dies, it's a pretty stirring moment. You know, we're halfway through the series, and there's all sorts of, you know, horrible stuff happens. But but you know, it was always kind of a beautiful horrible, because that's just what Ernie did.
Mm.
It's I just regret that we did not have the opportunity to do more. We, you know, DC, again, for whatever reason, thought that they should do a comic about a 13-year-old girl that was a fantasy, not a superhero comic. Mm-hmm. Great. That was wonderful for me. But they also said, this is going to be a maxi series, 12 issues, and we're out. So so we didn't get to meander in interesting ways the way we might have. Now, it makes for a more compact, compelling story, one that I hope someday someone will want to make into a movie because it's so loosely compact. But the chance to sort of explore other little facets of the world, like, so we meet early on the emissaries of Varn, who Dark Opal makes this pact with, and in the end, the pact involves sacrificing his henchman Sardonyx, and when Sardonyx is able to claw his way free, that ends up contributing to the downfall of Dark Opal. You know, again, classic storytelling, but we did it in our own dress, you know. But I really wanted to know more about the emissaries of Varn. I wanted to know about Varn. I wanted to know what it looked like. And we didn't have the opportunity to do that. And we might have if we'd had an ongoing series. Mm-hmm. Now, we did have an ongoing series afterward, but that was honestly for all the wrong reasons. It was because a toy company was interested, and DC did not want to have a toy company interested in a character that wasn't currently appearing in a comic.
Okay.
So we had to figure out how to very quickly, and we set up in the last few issues of the Maxi series, we set up a little bit for the ongoing, but I was never happy with it. And you know, if they'd said to us a year later, you know what, this has gotten enough of a response. We'd like to keep this character alive and think about what you would like to do with the character. Then I think it would have been quite different. But, you know, and then the toy license didn't even happen. Although this is something, you know, I feel bad for DC because we were among the first to sign what was then the new creator agreement, where we didn't have any rights to the character, but we had the 12-issue guarantee, and we had ongoing royalty interest in the character, right? Which for its time I think was very good. What people don't know is that Gary and I, and Gary and Ernie and I, actually made a considerable amount of money on the option for a toy line. And, you know, and DC, like, they couldn't say, oh, you know, Mishkin and Conan Cologne made a lot of money, because it was like sort of invisible, because they never saw the toy. And the reason they didn't see the toy was because Kenner kind of took a while before they thought it was okay. DC flew me into New York. We had these all-day discussions where they kept feeding us, and, you know, with the Kenner people. And the folks from Kenner that we were talking to, Gary and Ernie and I, and Karen Berger, our editor, were really interested. And it became clear very soon that we could not compete. It would be foolish to try to compete at the Barbie size doll, but that nobody was competing in the girls' fantasy 3.5-inch figure.
Okay.
Right.
About the Star Wars figure size?
Yeah, the Star Wars figures, or the Superpowers collection from Kenner, or something like that. So nobody's competing in that space. But it took the higher ups at Kenner a while to say, okay, let's give it a shot. DC, for whatever reason, didn't put the pressure on them. And they said, okay, look, we really do want to do it. We're going to go to Toy Fair, and we're just going to see that there's nothing competing with this. And they go to Toy Fair, and there's She-Ra. And, right? And that not only She-Ra, but a character called Golden Girl and her Guardians of the Gemstones, which by my lights was like actionable, legally, but I wasn't in charge. So then the wide open space we're at least 6 months behind on, and it all fades away. And then you should have seen Gary. There's an issue of Toy and Hobby World has this little squib about how Mattel has created this new space in the girls' fantasy action figure, and he's going, "We created that." I really thought he was going to turn into the Hulk. I just, it was just. But I mean, it was hugely disappointing. But look, it's only disappointing because of money. And I don't want to diss money, but the comic that we did, that 12-issue series, I think is really terrific, and it's a bright spot in my life, having had the opportunity to do those 12 issues with Gary and Ernie and with Karen as the editor, and with Tom Zuko's coloring, and I think John Costanza lettered it, but I can't remember anymore. Anyhow, it was quite the package. Of course, it's only been collected in black and white in one of the showcase editions, but that's life. I think that the time will come when there will be a color collection of the maxi series, and I was gratified when DC put out the showcase edition. They only included the stories that Gary and I wrote, because we both ended up leaving the ongoing series, me a little before him, and the later ones were not included in the, and I felt, whether that was just page count or not, I want to say that the folks at DC were recognizing who was really responsible for Amethyst. So yeah.
So I question about Amethyst. So yeah, on Earth she's 13 years old. She's Amy Winston.
Yeah.
And then
by the way, Weinstein was the family name. I was just discussing this with some people. In my mind, headcanon, right? In my mind, Herb Winston's father was Weinstein and changed it to Winston. And so Amethyst is Jewish. But this was in a period. I actually wrote something on in a Jewish kidlit Facebook group that now I've revised, and it's going to be in American Jewish Library News or something like that. You just didn't out yourself as a Jew, right? So yeah, to me she was Weinstein and she was Jewish, but that never showed up in the comic. Now go ahead with your question.
But so she goes to Gemworld, and yeah, she's in her 20s maybe.
Yeah, she's like 20, 21, something like that.
But now when she's in Gemworld in her 20s, emotionally or mentally, is she still...
emotionally she's Amy. She's Amy. This is why. So when people say to me, well, why didn't she ever really get together with Prince Topaz? My response is, because she's 13 years old. It's just, she might have been attracted to him, this 25-year-old, blonde, Prince guy, right? And he was certainly attracted to her, but no, she was 13 years old. She was always...
Well, I kind of got that, because when somebody is bowing and kissing her hand, she says she's embarrassed, and she says things like "oh my gosh," which don't sound like what you'd expect from a princess of Gemworld.
Yeah, right. No, she is always Amy at heart, and I think there's one place where she's just totally having trouble getting behind the idea of royalty and divine right of kings and all of that, because she grew up in America where there's a president and there's a democracy, and what's all this? It's and that's always her attitude. We didn't hammer hard on it, but yeah, she was oh my goshing because she's because she's a kid.
Is there anything about Amethyst that you wish you'd done differently?
The only thing that's different that I would do differently is there's a panel in the first issue that looks like one of Dark Opal's minions is getting ready to rape her. Depending on how you look at it. And that was, he was, you're going to paw at her, okay? He was, in a word I've discovered young people don't use anymore, a masher. I don't if you know that word. But, just press himself on her as best he can. But I wrote dialogue based on loose pencils and without color. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of the finished pencils and the dialogue and the color make the scene a lot darker than it was intended to be. Mm-hmm. So I do regret that. But it's, it's just one of these things that happens. But would I change Amethyst? I read that black and white showcase edition that came out, not having looked at this stuff for a long time. And I, number one, didn't remember everything that was going to be happening and was sometimes surprised, which was nice. and I liked it. I said, this like holds together. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm not going to pull out I'm not going to pull on any of the threads at this point. It's I think that we did a great job. The other thing I wish would really just be a matter of time. Ernie did the preview on Scratchboard. You know how Scratchboard works?
Scratchboard.
Yeah. So that he could, if he wanted to take an area of black, he could then scratch it away. He wouldn't ruin the paper. Mm-hmm. And so, so you know the striations on Dark Opal's face, right? He's got the black lines in. So that all came because in the preview, Ernie was doing it on Scratchboard. Now, obviously, he could imitate that, but he had different effects and lots of glowy, gemmy effects because he could just do a little scratch here and there that would just change it up. But it was so labor intensive that he couldn't do it for the ongoing series. So if I would change anything, it would be that they paid Ernie enough and gave him enough time to do the entire series on Scratchboard. Yeah.
Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld was published by DC Comics. The original 80s comics are still available on Comixology or used comics floating around the internet. Let us know what you think. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Tweet us at DeconComics, like our Facebook page, or join our active Facebook group. We'd also really appreciate your supporting us with a pledge on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where this weekend we'll publish our review of Captain America Civil War. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Critiquing Comics returns October 16th. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, in part 2 of my talk with Dan Mishkin, The Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation. Dan wrote this look at the report, what it accomplished, and its shortcomings. That book was also drawn largely by Ernie Colon, who died August 8th, and Dan will fill us in more about Ernie's body of work and what he was like to work with. Dan will also talk about some of the factors that facilitated the 1960s success of Marvel Comics and compare how things have worked at Marvel as compared to DC. That's all next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.